Star Wars The Grey War, Chapter 3 by Nathan Brown. Rogan smelt blood. He could see nothing, but even in his semi-conscious state he could practically taste the earthy metallic scent. He breathed in deeply and the distinct smell jolted him fully into consciousness. He realized his eyes were covered and he switched to infrared sight to see outside the covering over his eyes. He saw nothing in front of him but an empty room-temperature wooden chair. He tried to look around, but felt a stabbing pain in the back of his neck as soon as he turned his head. He relaxed his neck and looked forward, but now that he was aware of the pain, it refused to stop throbbing. He could now feel the sticky liquid crawling slowly down his neck and realized the blood he smelled was his own. He reached up to feel the wound, but found he couldn't move his arm. When he looked down, he saw that his arms were tied to the chair. He tried moving his legs, but found them unsurprisingly tied as well. He flexed his four appendages at once, trying to rip out his hands from the bonds, but stopped quickly once he realized how futile it was. There was no point wasting his strength. Without even trying, he knew the Force couldn't help him here. He was unable to use the Force to accomplish his small, pinpoint tasks. All he had mastered was a broad push that wouldn't do anything for him here. The gears working in his mind ground to a sudden halt. He thought he heard someone walking. He held his breath and strained to listen, but still the Jedi presence reached him before her soft footsteps. Nauseating anger swept over him like a wave, washing away his pain and all other distractions. An unintelligible voice came from within him, urged him to kill the approaching Jedi, but he was not a stupid man. He knew that the only advantage he had over the Jedi's strength was irrelevant while he was tied up like this. Even if he could escape the chair, Rogan admitted to himself that this fight would most definitely end the same as their last. This logic brought him calm, and he attempted to push away his remaining rage. He needed a clear head to get himself out of this. You struggle with your anger. That is a struggle all of us can relate to. The Jedi spoke suddenly, cutting through Rogan's thoughts. It shows promise that you're not simply giving in to it. The Jedi walked so she stood in front of Rogan. Rogan could see her warm, yellow-orange heat signature. He could even make out the deep cut above her eye, hot with exposed blood. I wonder if you will overcome your anger, Rogan, or if you'll simply succumb to it. You have an advantage over me, Rogan croaked, his dry throat cracking. I only know you as a Jedi. Rogan could see the Jedi's smile through the bag. I am Jedi Kinsa Una, but you can call me Kinsa, she explained. I am your captor, and I will be your judge. The Jedi Council will never accept you as a Padawan. You're too old. I wonder how someone of your sensitivity was passed over when you were young. I am not sure someone of your power and past can be released into society without supervision. Kinsa spoke slowly, as if she was working something out in her head. So prison then, or death? Do Jedi execute bound, helpless men, even ones with my past? We most certainly do not. And so we have two options. One, you are transported to Durin, a prison world where ships never land or take off. New prisoners are dropped off from an orbiting space station with a skyhook. It is transformed into a harsh society where strong rule and live well, and the weak will serve or die. I'm sure you would do well there. And the second option, Rogan asked, as promising as that one sounds. You come travel with me, and you become my apprentice. Rogan spat out a laugh that quickly turned into a painful, hacking cough. Did you not say I'm too old to be trained? He asked after he had recovered from his cough. Officially, yes, you are, but I could train you in secret. I'm not often back on Coruscant, and you could travel with me across the galaxy, observing me and training while I complete my missions. You would never be allowed to be a true Jedi, but once I felt you were ready, you would be let go to follow your own path. My own master, Master Ralph Trentz, found me when I was 14, well past the normally accepted age, but he saw potential in me. It was a turbulent time for the Jedi, and he was allowed to train me. If I was only a few years younger than you when I was found, I see no reason you shouldn't be given. Well, I'm sure you weren't a murderer when he found you, Rogan responded grimly. Perhaps not, but I assure you I was not using my gift for good. I have been informed of the circumstances surrounding your situation, and I believe fully that there can be redemption for all. With that, the Jedi pulled his hood off, and Rogan switched to normal sight. He was able to truly look at her for the first time. She looked even smaller without the visible heat radiating off her skin. Her skin had a light yellow hue, and her light blue eyes were soft and inviting. Her two thick tentacles were the same color as the rest of her. They protruded from the back of her head and hung down, almost reaching to her waist. She wore a light brown robe, the same Rogan had seen other Jedi wearing, with her own hood flipped down. There was a bright golden emblem that Rogan didn't recognize on the upper right of her robe. Her upper lip was split and badly swollen. The left side of her face, where her jawline met her neck, was also puffed up. Her cheekbone, just under her right eye, seemed slightly concave, and her entire face was discolored. The worst injury was a large gash above her left eye, which looked much larger now than it had when viewed in infrared because of the cool temperature of dried blood. Her eye was even bloodshot, as if the blood from the cut was seeping unseen from the inside into her eye. Rogan felt no guilt or remorse looking upon the woman he had disfigured. The Jedi had invaded his home, and Rogan had responded in kind. In Barabel culture, the women grew as big as the men and fought in wars with them. Just because they took care of the children instead of hunting didn't mean they were any less tough, and, as such, he had no qualms about fighting a woman. Rogan swallowed as he considered the words, trying to soothe his painfully dry throat, but he didn't have enough saliva. Neither option seemed appealing, but he knew he could never travel with a Jedi. Even having one in his presence made him feel ill. He knew he could never be one himself. However, he was certain there would be no escape from a prison world. If he was patient and played along, earning her trust enough to grant some freedom, he may be able to escape from the Jedi. Well, that's an easy choice, isn't it? So, do I start calling you Master? Kinsa smiled, and faster than Rogan could see, the Jedi's hilt was in her hands. With a quick snap hiss, a yellow blade appeared. Rogan stiffened and panicked. How could the Jedi know? He had heard myths as a boy that Jedi could read minds, but he had never believed it, and now he was afraid he was going to die because of it. The blade flickered around him, but Rogan felt no pain. He looked down and released a breath that he didn't know he was holding. He raised his now freed hands and started to stand up. Before he could fully stand up, his legs wobbled and gave out. He put his hands down to catch his fall, but he instinctively used the force to keep himself up. He found his legs and stood up straight, facing his new master. Perspective change. Kinsa's new apprentice bent his head stiffly, giving what a generous man might call a bow. Kinsa opened her mouth to say something, but then shut it. She remembered her arrogance as a Padawan. This would be a long road. So what's next? Rogan grasped, sounding parched. Well, first you drink this, Kinsa commanded, throwing a metal canteen at him. Perspective change. Rogan opened the canteen and drank deeply. There was a flash of pain as his dried throat resisted the water for a millisecond before succumbing to the cool, refreshing wave. As soon as the water reached his stomachs, they growled with anger. Before drinking the water, he'd had no idea how hungry he was. His stomach continued to grumble, demanding to be fed. Any food to go with this? Rogan asked, wiping the water from the corner of his mouth. I have some food rations, Kinsa replied, pulling 2 pouches from one of the many pockets under her belt. She tossed them to him and turned to leave. Eat while you walk. We should leave quickly. Rogan studied the pouches with disdain. Master, I'm not sure you know much about barbells. We have 2 stomachs. These won't even fill one. The Jedi kept walking. You'd be surprised, she remarked without looking back. Rogan grunted and quickly followed his new master out the door. He looked down and tore at the first silver package, exposing a light brown, semi-hard bar. He took a bite and was surprised by the taste, or lack thereof. Blah, what is this? It tastes like nothing. It's military rations. Everything you need and nothing you don't, including taste. You'd better get used to it. Rogan said nothing, preferring to use his mouth to consume the tasteless nutrition. His stomach settled down and filled up before he had even gotten halfway through the second bar. He was amazed that such a small meal could fill him. He shoved the last half down into his mouth and washed it down with the rest of his water. He wasn't sure when he would eat again. He continued following after the Jedi, who was setting a surprisingly fast pace for being with such short legs. He was still feeling ill from the sickening feeling that was constant when he was in the presence of the Jedi. She was facing forward, and Rogan realized there was no way she could see him. He wondered if the Jedi had some way of knowing where he was, or if she was just foolishly trustful. Rogan could feel the general location of the Jedi, but he wondered if she could feel a more pinpoint location because of her training. Rogan figured there must be some way the Jedi knew he was there, and thought it best not to test it. No point giving her another reason not to trust him. Lost in thought, he didn't realize how close they were to the spaceport until they'd arrived. She must have been holding him close to it. He had only been to the spaceport once before, to meet a member of his tribe who had gone off-ward and was returning. It was a very small spaceport. Barab 1 had almost no outside contact, incoming or outgoing. In fact, the only ships you could see in the tiny spaceport was the slave ships. Barabels, with their large build and natural armor, were extremely sought after in the gladiator pits. At first, the slavers had only been able to pick up 1 or 2 Barabels a year, but then a new law had been put into place to deal with the intertribe debts. When one Barabel owed another of the same tribe money but couldn't pay his debts, he had 2 options. He could work for the man without pay until he paid it off, or he could let the man sell him to the slavers to fight in the many gladiator pits around the galaxy. If the man could win 5 fights, then he was set free and could return debt-free to Barab 1. The law also stated that the Barabel to whom the debt was owed could pay the man as much or as little as he wanted for his work. Because of this, most people choose to fight for their freedom rather than work for practically nothing, possibly for their entire life. In fact, there was a long line of men with their hands tied and bags on their head, being led by a group of rough-looking humans onto an old black troop ship, with the markings scraped off. Rogan saw 3 Barabels breaking odd, 2 reds and 1 large black, heading toward the bathroom with one of the slavers. A plan immediately flew into Rogan's mind. He had seen the acceptance and naivete in the Jedi's eyes. He knew this would work. Hey, Master, would you mind if I went to the bathroom before we head on? Your ship is probably small, and I gotta assume the bathroom would be cramped, especially for a guy my size. Kinsa kept walking. It's not that small. Come on, we have to be going. You'll be fine. Rogan stopped walking. You may be my master now, but you're not my parent. I go to a bathroom when I want to. You can come in and hold my hand if you insist, but I gotta go. Kinsa sighed and turned around. I know it's hard having someone that orders you around after being a free man, but you're going to have to start listening. I was a Padawan once too. I remember feeling angry when I was told to do things that I didn't feel I had to. So I acted out over nothing, but you must learn to accept my decisions. Listen, Master. This isn't about me being defiant, it's just about me not wanting to stink up your whole ship. It's a small ship, and I have 2 stomachs. Yeah, okay, she told him, turning back around. But try to be quick about it. Rogan walked briskly towards the bathrooms that had been quite a bit harder than he had expected. Perspective change. Kinsa sat silently on her ship, waiting for her new Padawan and nursing the wounds that he had given her. It had been a long time since she'd been injured like this. It brought her back to her time in the war and her life before the Jedi. As she tightened the bindings around her torso and gave herself another kolto shot to speed up the healing, she felt a bit happy. Even though it hurt a lot, it felt good to have physical manifestation of the work she was doing. She was always training, and it felt like it had been forever since she'd done anything with it. As she looked into the mirror, hoping the deep cut above her eye didn't scar, she questioned her choices concerning the young Barabel. Rogan had such a strong connection to the Force that Kinsa had thought it would be foolish to just abandon him on a prison world and waste all that potential. Now that she was done, however, she feared what would happen if someone so strong fell away from the light side. He would make a dangerous dark Jedi. Kinsa's thoughts drifted, as they often did, to her late master. Master Rill had fought against and died to the last Sith Lords on Ruusan. It was because of his sacrifice, along with the oblation of hundreds of other Jedi, that the Sith had finally been purged from the galaxy forever. Kinsa could not live with herself if he disrespected her master's memory by creating a new follower of the dark side. Thinking of her former master always made Kinsa feel agitated. She cleared her mind and meditated, hoping the Force would give her answers she needed about Padawan. She turned off all the instruments on his ship, powering it down completely, and sat in silence. She reached out to the Force, and she had been trained to do, and as she had done thousands of times. However, as soon as she felt herself spreading out, reaching for the Force, she hit a wall. Her eyes snapped open and she drew in a deep breath. Never before had she felt something blocking her connection in that way. It was as if the Force itself was pushing her away, like it was trying to hide from her. The more she thought about it, the more she felt that the Force was clouding her. Whatever was going to happen, good or bad, was the will of the Force. Kinsa took some small comfort in that. Perspective change. Rogan entered the bathroom and quickly made his plan. The human slaver was just in front of him, keeping watch by the door. He stood like a young man, but from behind looked much older. He had long, wispy white hair hanging down from his shoulders, but had a huge bald spot in the middle of his head. His skin was so thin, Rogan could see his veins as he snuck up behind him. He had long, bony fingers that were resting comfortably on the bolster pistols strapped to his belt. He was so thin, his loose, stretchy skin hanging off his bones, that Rogan was surprised he'd gotten his job, handling the massive prisoners. The 2 red Barabels were in the stalls, and the 1 black one was standing at the urinal. Rogan quickly got close behind the slaver and swung his elbow out, twisting to the side and aiming for his temple. The sharp point of his elbow collided with the side of his head. The slaver started to drop, and Rogan grabbed him and silently guided his body to the ground. Rogan thought about killing the man, whose entire job was controlling his people, But seeing as he was about to meet his friends, Rogan thought that may not be the best idea. Next, Rogan moved forward to the Black Barbell, just as he was turning away from the urinal, the man's eyes widening in surprise, but before he could say anything, Rogan thrust his large, meaty hand towards the man's throat, fingers outstretched and claws extended. Whatever words the man was going to say turned into a hacking cough and a gasping for air. Rogan drove his knee sharply into the man's stomach, knocking the little air he had managed to suck in back out. As the man doubled over in pain, Rogan grabbed him into a headlock with one arm and used his elbow to smash the base of the man's neck. He dropped to the ground with a thud. He wouldn't kill this man either. He couldn't handle killing either another Endor. Rogan chuckled softly as he looked down at the body of his brethren. This man wouldn't have lasted 5 fights. Rogan had probably just saved his life. Rogan moved the man to the empty stall and quickly took off the unconscious man's pants and shirt and swapped them for his own. The clothes were bright yellow and had the slave group's insignia on the back. Even without the hood or the hand bindings the man had taken off, it would be clear that he was a slave. He knew humans had an extremely hard time telling them apart. As long as they were the same color, Rogan knew he could pass. He ran out of the bathroom and, once he was out, he made a show of appearing nervous and looking around frantically as he ran. People noticed almost instantly the slavers ran after him, shouting. He ran slowly, allowing them to easily catch up to him. Felt a kick at the back of his leg, and he pinched forward, using his hands to break his fall. He had to concentrate to hold himself back as the men roughly grabbed him and tied his hands behind his back. He caught a few punches and hard shoves, but he knew the slavers wouldn't do any serious damage. They wouldn't want to harm their property, since they got paid for every fight he won. The men put a cloth on him and quickly brought him in the ship. "Stay there," growled one of the men, shoving him roughly onto the bench on the ship, surrounded by barbells. "It's just a quick jump to Elcaro. We should be there in less than a day," another yelled to the lot of them. "We'll come back to feed you in a few hours. Fight well, and you can be back here in less than a week." The door remained open for another minute before the 2 red barbells were brought onto the ship. He could hear them grumbling and being pulled out of the bathroom, the old creaking door starting to swing shut, and he caught the men worrying about their unconscious friend and cursing. The big one. The door clanged shut and he switched to infrared vision. In the cold metal ship, all he could see were the blue bodies of cool reptilians. Perspective change. Rogan sat in silence, listening to the hushed conversations going on around him. They had all felt the ship drop out of hyperdrive, and now, what they were closing in on the planet, everyone was nervous. They asked each other all sorts of questions about the fights. Would they each have to fight each other? Or would it be against other species? Was it going to be a bunch of one-on-one fights, or one large group fight? Of course, no one knew what would actually happen, but they tried to answer each other's questions all the same. Back and forth, people asked things and argued over the answer. Rogan kept silent. He wasn't nervous. He didn't know any more than the rest of them. He just didn't think it mattered. He knew he would walk into and then out of the pit of 5 times. Then he would be free. He didn't know what made him nervous whenever he thought about it. Was what he would do once he would be free. His life had always been dictated solely by need. He needed to hunt to provide for his clan. He needed to survive in the jungle. He needed to escape the Jedi's grasp, and now he needed to win 5 fights. Once that was done, he could do what he wanted. Another thing he didn't know was what he wanted. He felt like he had been born in the wrong time. He'd been given this strange gift, one whose greatness demanded to be used, but he had nothing to do with it. Had he been born just a couple decades ago, he could have been a Sith, could have been a warrior in the Brotherhood of Darkness. Of course, they all died at the hand of the Jedi, so perhaps being born then wasn't any better than now. Perhaps if he had just been born different, then he could have joined the Jedi when he was a child, trained, and done something useful with his gift. But instead, just being around one disturbed him. He wondered if there were others like him, beings who had been given these abilities but had nothing to do with it. Before Rogan could start figuring it out, the hatch at the back of the ship opened, and the hold grew brighter as the warmth of the sun came in. He heard the mechanic whirring as the ramp lowered, and then the metallic clang as it hit the port. He turned towards it as he heard the footsteps on the ramp and turned to see multiple warm red bodies flooding into the hold. He wondered, not for the first time, why slavers bothered to put hoods on Barabels when they had infrared sight. Perhaps they didn't know. He was yanked up roughly by two sets of hands. "This for sucker punching me and trying to escape," he heard one of the men slur. Either he was more injured than Rogan would have thought, or he was drunk. He felt the first bounce off his stomach. There was a slight whimper as a tiny fist hit his scaly abdomen. "That must have hurt," Rogan smirked with a condescending tone. "We'll see how big and tough you are when you in the pits," the man retorted, cradling his hand to his chest. "When you die, I'll be watching, smiling." They were led in single file off the ship into a crowded spaceport. Rogan was immediately assaulted by thousands of beings milling around him. Being from a backwater planet of cold-blooded people, the constant stream of warm bodies shocked him. The orangish-red people mixed with the bright fluorescent lights flashing from the tall buildings that shone through the night created an amazing rainbow of colors. Almost more than the sights, the smells shocked him. So many smells, all hot. The warm, sweaty bodies, unknown meats cooking on open grills, the greasy, oily fumes coming off the hot engines of idling ships. It all mingled together to create an oppressive smell he could only describe as hot. They were pulled in a procession through the thick of people. Bodies bumped into him from all sides, and he had to breathe deeply to concentrate, not to react. He had never been around so many people. It made him extremely uneasy. He felt feelings of fear and anger drifting from his fellow prisoners. Barab was a sparsely populated planet. When too many people gathered in one place, tempers got high and there was fighting. That is why Barabel separated themselves into tribes and lived in small family. After a few minutes of walking, they entered a room, and their hoods were removed. It was dark and seemed to feel like the middle of night, but Rogan's oversensitive eyes could see clearly. They were in a large, unfurnished room with drab, washed-out orange walls and a plain cement floor. The heat of the city seemed to be slowly peeling the dull orange off the walls, revealing the gray cement beneath. The thick metal bars crisscrossed along the windows, as if any of the massive barbells could fit through the tiny squares cut in the cement. Besides, the single door in the room was warped, badly cut wood, and looked like it was about to break on its own. If any of them wanted to leave, that's the way they would be going. The slavers walked around and untied their hands. "You have 6 hours. There's food in these packs." The men heaved large bags off their backs and set them on the ground. "You can eat the rest. Then it's time to fight. We've delivered you, so you're no longer our concern. You can try to escape if you want, but I wouldn't suggest it. Fight well." The slavers filtered out the door, and the Barabels were left alone. End of chapter 3.